Alright folks, we're back on the common test server for patch 1.6.1, and for this video, we'll take a closer look at the Turtle Mk.1. It is a premium tier 8 British tank destroyer. It is practically a smaller tortoise with no weak spot, that is the loader mini turret right here. So they replaced it with the commander cupola, but if you already have the tortoise, that's the weak spot. So it is a loader mini machine gun turret for personnel or anti-aircraft, but if you do get hit and pinned in this weak spot, sometimes you will lose a loader. From my experience playing with this vehicle, but it looks larger obviously than the Turtle. So the Turtle kind of looks like a Sturmpanzer IV based on a medium tank chassis and a large superstructure. It's also kind of Doombar or Boombar, however you pronounce that, but it's only a paper tank, so this vehicle is obviously non-existent in real life, but it fits with the British non-turreted tank destroyer playstyle, which is more of a assault gun that you drive this vehicle into the face of enemies and basically rely on armor and the gun to out DPM your enemies. So it is a 55-pounder anti-tank gun, so this thing packs more of a punch than the 32-pounder that's on the Carnarvon. It has only 4 more millimeters of pin, but better alpha, so 330 compared to 280 I believe. And this thing has 3000 DPM without the crew, and with the crew it's 3129, so that's a pretty high machine gun of a gun to out DPM your enemies. Now this vehicle has no speed whatsoever, so it mostly relies on the armor, and the frontal armor is about 250 for the superstructure plus. So we'll take a look at the actual stats, but unfortunately there's no super test server stats for this vehicle because the tank inspector stuff broke, I guess. So we don't know the actual ammo count of this vehicle, as well as the soft stats like dispersion or terrain resistance. Also, we don't know how big the actual caliber is. It's a 55-pounder, but I think it's bigger than a 90mm, and this is important because it overmatches the STRV S1 armor with a slope 30mm, so I presume this thing will just overmatch the armor of the S-Tank, presumably. But let's take a look at the actual stats. So it has a crew of 6, fits with your Tortoise, fits with your AT tanks, AT-15 as well. So this is the first tier 8 premium for the British in terms of tank destroyer. You also have the tier 7 and some of the lower tiers like the Excalibur, but those are more of a special tank. So it has decent enough crew training potential, and let's take a look at the actual firepower. So 224mm of pen with, I presume, AP shells. So let's take a look. It should be AP, APCR, and high explosive. Also, I cannot tell you guys the actual rounds, but let's see if I can figure out for here. Yep, AP, APCR, AP, CBC. It's a normal high explosive, so no HESH. And discarding sable rounds for the gold shell. Alright, fair enough. Does it tell me the actual caliber of the gun? No, it doesn't. Oh well. So I presume, alright, it will overmatch the S-Tank armor, but it fires every 6 seconds or 5.7 seconds or so with a rammer and vents. So it is a machine gun of a rapid firing gun. Has a gun traverse of 21 degrees per second, which is decent. 10 degrees of gun depression, which is great. 20 elevation, and 20 degrees of gun arc to each side. That is the same as the Tortoise, which is very comfortable compared to something like the TS5 or the T28. So those are only 10 degrees to each side. And what that means is, with 20 degrees to each side, you can somewhat side scrape and actually use the gun while side scraping. So interesting. Has a very quick aim time of 1.63 seconds, 0.33 accuracy, which is okay. It's not bad, but it's nowhere as crazy as a 0.3 on the Tortoise, so it's still a decent, fairly sniping of a gun. And 3129 DPM, so machine gun characteristics of the DPM. And here is the important part, the survivability of this vehicle. So 1400 health, it's okay. It's more like a slower, heavy, medium. Well, it's like a pseudo heavy tank. It's like a fat medium health. Alright, but 254 millimeters of frontal armor, 101 at the sides, and 76 at the rear. But here is the caveat. We have to look at the actual armor. And the side armor for the superstructure is actually 150. So here is the armor profile. Very small commander cupola. That's not exactly a weak spot, so that's very good. Upper parts of the superstructure is 254, so as advertised. So that's auto bounce basically for any low tiers. And the mantlet is very strong. Don't even think about it. So 500 millimeters. Jeez. But you do have the slope area that is only 152, effective about 230. Upper plate is about 210-ish, so less sloping there, but lower plate is about 200 millimeters. So other than hitting at the superstructure, you might be pinned if they're shooting a high caliber gun at you. But this vehicle has gun depression, so utilize that fact over the TS5. The TS5 has like 5 degrees of gun depression, so making hill battles a little bit more tough, and you will expose the large lower plate, so people will often shoot gold. And obviously this is AP shell. It is calculated with the normalization with AP, but if you use APCR, it's more effective, obviously. So it's bumping up to 220 from 210. And 230 to 245. So obviously, if you're shooting APCR, the armor is more effective, right? If you're shooting high explosive anti-tank, it's going to be even more effective, 230 to 260. So it's only calculating the normalization from the sloping of the armor, and that's kind of important. But the armor is okay at the front, mostly because it's only 210 or so for the upper plate. If this was about 230, this vehicle would be perfectly OP, in my honest opinion. If the lower plate was about 220 or 200, it's still good right now. But if the middle plate or upper plate right here, and this peak right here was about 230, this vehicle might be OP. It might be. But here is also what's interesting is the side armor is 152 millimeters for the superstructure. The hull is 101, but it has like 6 millimeters of space armor and 30 millimeters of tracks. So side skirts with the tracks give this vehicle decent side scraping potential. And obviously the superstructure is auto bounce for most of the guns. It is 152 millimeter side armor for the superstructure. Now engine deck is obviously weak, 101, and the rear of the armor is 44. It's 76 for the superstructure, so if you get hit by artillery shells, sometimes you will be pinned by the large caliber artillery shells. That's usually 50 millimeters for high explosive rounds. But this thing relies on frontal armor, and sometimes it relies on the sloping. So yeah, it's practically a smaller Badger, if you will. So armor wise, I still think it's pretty decent, and if you do side scrape, just be wary of the drive wheels, and it's still not that bad. So drive wheels you can actually side scrape, and with the 20 degrees to each side, you can actually side scrape like this and still point the gun forwards. So try not let your opponent hit your lower plate, but it's still 220 and upper plate is about 230. So you can actually drive around like this instead of pointing your tank frontally without angling. So I still think the armor is very solid. Mobility wise, it weighs 60 tons, so it doesn't look like it, but it weighs 60 tons. Has an 800 horsepower engine, 13.33 horsepower per ton ratio, which is decent. It's not slow, but it's not that fast, so it could shift, but we don't know the terrain resistance. 20 kilometers per hour top speed, 10 reverse, so it's the same top speed as the Tortoise, and only 24 degrees per second hull traverse. So it is obviously a turtle in a sense, but horsepower per turn ratio is not bad, so I'll take it. View range and concealment. It has 370 meters of view range, which is okay, but the radio is garbage. 595 with the crew. The radio could be better, but it's a frontline tank, so you're obviously in the heat of battle, so you don't actually camp in the back. You could camp in the back and snipe, but the penetration is not that good for sniping. And the camo is not that bad, so it actually has some camo. But let's take a look at one of the weak spot about this vehicle, the weaker points about this vehicle, and that is the gun. So for this gun, it's only 224 millimeters of pen for AP shells, and that's okay for a heavy tank or medium tank. It's for below average tank destroyers mostly, so you do have to aim with this vehicle instead of just basically shoot gold shells or just shoot at random silhouettes and you actually pin. So it's not exactly like the STRV S tank, basically just hit the target and you're likely pin. So you have to aim for weak spots. And also the gold shell is not that good. It's only 253 millimeter for APCR shell. AP CBC or whatever the hell that thing is. Oh, it's the Scalding Sable. What the hell am I talking about? But 253 millimeters of pen for a gold shell, that's not great. So against heavily armored targets like a TS5, you have to shoot at their commander cupola, whereas they have to just spam gold shell into your upper plate. So you have to rely on mostly hills and rely on your superstructure to bounce the shots if they're going to spam gold at you. And when they see this vehicle, you'll likely become a gold magnet. So yeah, the gold shell kinda blows. But let's take a look at all the comparisons with vehicles basically of the same playstyle. So you have the AT-15. It has a smaller caliber of a gun, 20 pounder. So this 20 pounder will have trouble going through, I think, S tanks, but yeah, it's about the same penetration. You have more alpha, obviously, and this vehicle has more DPM, so it's focused on out DPMing while protecting yourself with the armor. Now accuracy is also not the best compared to the AT-15, but it's a godsend compared to the TS5, so yeah, that's better. But the TS5 just shoots gold shell, and the gold shell on the TS5 is like 300 millimeters high explosive anti-tank, if I'm correct. But this gun is more comfortable to shoot with because of the 20 degrees to each side of the gun arc and 10 degrees of gun depression with 20 elevation. So this thing could use hills, this thing could readjust to targets a lot more quickly than the TS5, but the gun doesn't traverse as fast, so take your time to aim. And this thing is a rapid firing gun, so take advantage of that. Now I think the armor is also not as good as the TS5, but it's pretty close. So take a look at the preview of the TS5. We haven't done this for the TS5 because I haven't figured out this system beforehand back then. But for the TS5, you have to aim for the weak spot, and that is the commander cupola. The lower plate is fairly strong. It is almost auto bounce unless you shoot gold shells. But the downside is the TS5 only has 5 degrees of gun depression. So if you want to shoot over a hill, you have to commit. If you commit, you expose your lower plate, and people will shoot gold shell into here and they will pin. Also, the TS5 looks longer and with more areas of the weak spot in the back, so therefore artillery shells will likely pin and hit. So I still think I would prefer the Turtle's armor, mostly because I don't have the commander cupola weak spot. And if I get a hill or a wreck to cover up the lower plate, the Turtle's armor will be better than the TS5, and you can use that more effectively with the gun depression. So yeah, it's a toss-up, but mostly the armor is still pretty good. And both vehicles have decent amounts of health, even though it's more like a smaller heavy tank. ish of a health. It weighs 60 tons, so about the same as the TS5. And it has better horsepower per ton ratio. Now, also I don't know the terrain resistance, so that's a toss-up, but it has slower top speed, so that might be a problem, and reverse speed as well. Traverse is also slower, okay, that's fine. View range is all the same. Less camo though, okay. But the radio is also not as good. So, what would I give this vehicle with a rating? If you play this vehicle right, if you play with the same playstyle that is the Badger, or more of the so with the Badger than with the Tortoise, because the Badger has a weaker lower plate, but then again it's about 230 millimeters effective. So if you have the same playstyle as the Badger, you will probably like this vehicle. And the gun traverse arc for the horizontal rotation is more comfortable than the Badger. The Badger only has 15, the Tortoise has 20, so it will feel like the Tortoise, but it's only at tier 8, so sometimes you'll get Himmelsdorf with a bunch of tier 6s, and you just squash their face with outrageous DPM. But is it a good vehicle for frontlines? You will see a lot of frontline TS5s, and it's only good if you have supporting teammates. So it's not as effective as something like a defender, obviously. So there is a downside to not having a turret. So that's why the SU-130PM is not as popular as the Scorpion G. Even though their mobility is about the same, their armor is about the same, the Scorpion G has a turret. The SU-130PM doesn't. So there is a factor about the Scorpion G being more popular, obviously. It's also the same factor between the Waffentrigger of E100 comparing to the Foch B, the 120 version, because, or 155 version, but 120 version is more accurate, because the turret system, you have to rotate the Foch B around, whereas with the Waffentrigger of E100, you do the same thing without exposing or wasting more time being exposed. So there is a downside to not having a turret, but the gun arc is pretty comfortable. So for a rating system, I would give this vehicle a 8.25 out of 10. If this thing has a better upper plate, if this vehicle has more penetration with the gold shell at least, I would give it 8.5 or 9 out of 10. But the downside is the upper plate is a weak spot, quote unquote. So people will see this vehicle, people will spam gold shells, and you will eat the gold shell with the upper plate. The superstructure is more comfortable to work with, as well as with the sloping of the lower plate and the side armor, but mostly focus on side scraping and haul down tactics. Don't fully commit to relying on just your armor with the upper plate and other stuff. But yeah, 8.25 out of 10. If this gun has more penetration or has a better gold shell, 8.5 or 8.75. But it is a mini Tortoise, and I do like playing my Tortoise because this thing just squashed people's faces. And they did buff the armor. They buffed all the non-turreted British tank destroyers with additional armor before the Badger came out. But as you can see with the Tortoise, the usual penetration at tier 9 is about 220 to 250 for most of the guns, and this thing has enough armor other than the loader mini turret. But yeah, this thing has solid armor, and it's only a strip of 100 millimeters that's well sloped, so don't even think about it. So yeah, the Tortoise can also side scrape, and it has 170 millimeters of side armor to side scrape with. Jeez. So if you like the playstyle of the Tortoise, you'll like the Turtle, and it's not bad. I mean, compared to the garbage like the ROM Panzer or some of the other garbage like the Kananam Yak Panzer before it had the 105, yeah, this thing is a lot better. It suits the British playstyles, it suits the characteristics of British tank destroyers, like crazy high DPM, and yeah, I like it. It's not bad. It's not bad at all. But there you go, folks. The Turtle Mk.1. coming soon, I think. But if this is a bond shop item, not a premium store item, you can actually buy this vehicle for bonds, I would highly recommend it, along with the E75 TS. But I doubt it, so they promised us some sort of bond-esque system with the vehicles for like half a year now, but that never came to fruition, so okay. But thank you guys for watching this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.
Imagine me and you, I do. I think about you day and night. It's only right to think about the girl you love and hold her tight. So happy together.